Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And now, here are your hosts, Scott and Jesse from CompassKnox.com.
Hello and welcome again to Compass Points, the weekly podcast where we talk about Knoxville news, government, politics, business, education, whatever gets our attention. I am Jesse Mayshark, co-founder and co-publisher of Compass, which you can find at CompassKnox.com. Joined, as always, by Scott Barker, also co-publisher and co-founder of Compass. How are you doing today, Scott?
Oh, it's not too badly. You know, the fall is in the air, so that's always good. Thankful we dodged the tropical storm. So,
yeah,
and looking forward to the election coming up too. So
yeah, coming up soon. Well, you mentioned the tropical storm, Hurricane Helene, that blew through here, of course, last week, and as you say, had very minimal effect here in Knoxville, but of course, devastating impact in western North Carolina and some of the eastern Tennessee communities to our east, and we're going to talk about that a bit. We do also have, as you mentioned, the election coming up. We wrote this past week about one of the more significant state house district races in District 18. We'll talk about that. Also, we did an explainer on the city of Knoxville referendum that would change the way city council seats are elected. Talk about that a little bit. In business news or business/development news, the city of Knoxville has some big and fairly expensive plans for Sevier Avenue in South Knoxville. And also this past week was Innovate 6.5 Week, the annual celebration of all things entrepreneurial in Knoxville, and we'll just touch on that. But Scott, I think we really have to start with Hurricane Helene, the terrible flooding that swept through communities throughout western North Carolina and really had a pretty major impact on some areas here in East Tennessee as well. This has been, I would say, the biggest issue of the week. The way it's affected people here, I think, in Knoxville has been that, first of all, lots of people in Knoxville know all of those areas. There's a lot of people who live in Knoxville who are from a lot of those areas and or have friends or family there. And we've just seen a real outpouring at sort of all levels of the community, from grassroots organizations up to our elected leaders, kind of trying to rally together and provide whatever assistance that people can over there.
Yeah, there's a kinship with western North Carolina and obviously northeastern Tennessee, where a lot of this was too. But a lot of people from East Tennessee, go over there for vacations. We, have relatives over there. There's a lot of travel back and forth. In fact, the weekend before Helene hit, we were staying in a cabin.
Meaning you and your wife?
My wife and I were staying in a cabin outside of Boone.
Yeah. On
a creek, and I kind of doubt that cabin's there anymore.
Yeah.
Just judging from the creek there, but so I mean, you sit there and go, wow, that town where I just was, we were outside Boone, but we went into Boone and did stuff, and it was just some of the news video from there was just absolutely stunning.
Yeah.
And Boone was one of the harder hit areas too. So
yeah, the photos and videos that we've seen of some of these places, especially when it's places that
right,
like Asheville, like Hot Springs, places that you have been to, or Greenville, right here in Greene County. The damage on the Tennessee side of the mountains was less significant in some ways than what we saw on the North Carolina side, but it was still major. Downtown Newport flooded. Greene County lost the pumps at their water treatment station, and so have not been able to provide water to people. Cott County has had serious water shortages, and so a lot of the sort of relief efforts that we've seen here locally has been, Cott County is directly to our east.
Yeah.
And so, people have been driving and again, Knox County government collected water and delivered it, but then there were a lot of community efforts as well, just various groups that got together, and so there's just been caravans driving back and forth to the places that people are able to access, which on the Tennessee side you can actually get to most of these places. On the North Carolina side, there's a lot of places that just basically are only accessible by air still at this point.
Yeah, there was a news report that I saw online. My Charlotte news station was trying to get to Boone and couldn't. And it was all about how they were trying to get there, and the roads were, the damage to the roads, damage, trees down, all that kind of stuff. They just could not get there, and at least on the roads. And it's so difficult to. First of all, these are difficult things for governments to address. Period. These types of emergencies, especially something of this magnitude. And then you have things like in Newport, the city's entire kind of public services fleet, all their trucks, all of their heavy equipment, all that's gone.
Right.
All that got destroyed. There was nothing they could do.
Equipment that they would need to do the work to recover from the storm was itself destroyed by the storm.
Absolutely. So, and that's where FEMA and TEMA come in and help out. And, the official government response here was interesting. The as you said, the county, had water, a place for people to drop off water that they would take up there. And you got to remember, they're doing this through official channels too, and they were really warning people not to do it through unofficial channels because it's just, you could get in the way if you didn't know exactly where to go and exactly what to do. The sheriff's office used their helicopter to help evacuate Unicoi County Hospital, which they had to do rooftop evacuations from there. So, and they were doing that. The city of Knoxville, the fire department, and the police department sent swift water personnel, people who've been trained in swift water rescue, to Northeast Tennessee, and Knox County Rescue did as well. So,
and the Knox County school system deployed some maintenance crews up to the schools that have been affected there. It really has been sort of an all hands on deck.
Yeah.
And it continues this weekend. Well, so this episode will come out on Sunday. On Saturday, County Mayor Glenn Jacobs and some other organizations have organized a donation drop off and collection event. There are benefit concerts, some taking place this weekend, some planned for next week. There's just sort of this whole range of efforts, and I think it is. I don't want to say it's like a silver lining, because you don't want to go through the emergencies to get to where this level of response is necessary. It is always somewhat heartening to see that level of response and to see people really from all walks of life, in many different ways, whether it's donating money or goods or whatever, just kind of reaching out and trying to do what they can. We did also see, maybe predictably, given the political climate that we live in, there was a little bit of, I would say, politicization that went on in some of the rhetoric, especially early on. You had allegations, and it kind of depended on like who was in charge of which places. On the one hand, you had some people on the right, including former President Donald Trump, making what turned out to be basically completely unfounded allegations that the federal government was slow in responding to some of these areas. As Trump put it, they're not helping people in Trump areas, in Trump counties. And one of the things I thought there was he might want to check the Asheville voting totals because Buncombe County voted, I think it was 61% for Biden in 2020. And that is, Asheville is not Trump country. Now, it's certainly surrounded by Trump country, but the idea that the federal government was not responding to Asheville because those are Trump voters, first of all, it's not true that they weren't responding to Asheville. Second, it's not true that those are Trump voters.
Well, in Asheville, I did go take a look at that when when that allegation was made, and Buncombe County and Watauga County, where Boone is, and home to Appalachian State University, is also. Those were the only two counties in Western North Carolina that voted for Biden,
right,
in 2020. Every other county, where all these other, little smaller places, were they're like East Tennessee, mountain counties, very red, very much Trump supporters in 2020, and they're getting whatever help FEMA can give them too. So.
Right. Well, and then on the Tennessee side, we saw some of the same conversation from people on the left. There was an allegation that Governor Bill Lee was tardy in declaring an emergency and requesting federal aid. And it is true that the Tennessee request came in later than the request from Florida and Georgia and North Carolina, but that really just tracks the path of the storm because this played out over the course of 24 to 36 hours. Lee did make that declaration and request by the Friday afternoon of the storm. And his explanation for it, when people ask, why did this come later, is he said, well, we had to actually see what had happened. I mean, there's always going to be a lag between when the disaster hits. And because at first, when the disaster hits, everybody's just being hit by the disaster. And so then you kind of have to assess, here's what's going on. And yes, we're going to need this. And so, yes, his request came after those, which meant that the federal declaration also came after the other ones. But that was, again, just following the track of the storm. And then in the last day or two, we have seen several Tennessee public officials, Congressman Tim Burchett and various other people coming out and trying to tamp down some of the things that some of the kind of conspiracy theories people are spreading online, or, these unverified reports that, FEMA or TEMA teams are coming in and confiscating, donated goods and this kind of stuff. And like that's also not true. I think there's maybe at some level an understandable impulse to want to blame some person, some entity for something that has affected so many people. But what this shows is that these disasters do not respect political boundaries. They don't respect partisan leanings. They just hit where they hit, and everybody who's there has to deal with them. And then whatever governments are in those places, whether, you have a state government with a Democratic governor like in North Carolina or a Republican governor like in Tennessee, they're all going to have to respond to it. And so I think it has been good to see some of our political leaders step forward and say, like, let's kind of
cool it on the political stuff.
Right.
Exactly. And like you said, Burchett suspended his fundraising efforts and encouraged everybody to donate money to
as did his opponent, Democrat
yes.
Jane George, right? Yeah,
and so it was, and that was good to see that for the most part, our political leaders are saying let's focus on on the job at hand, not on the politics that don't even deserve to be surrounding it, but could be surrounding it.
And I think, sort of the bigger picture in all of this, which some people have certainly talked about in the wake of it, just as we talked about it in the wake of the record-setting winter storm that we had here just back in January, climate change is happening.
It's here. It hit us.
Yeah.
The thing is, a lot of people in East Tennessee kind of thought, well, we're inland, we're insulated from it. We got the mountains around us, and we're okay. Well, other than the heat, okay, well, it's a little warmer. Who cares? Well, here's storm, and there's really no denying that that climate change made this a stronger storm. This is literally something that has been predicted for years, decades
by people. Like, one of the effects is that you're going to have stronger storms coming out of the Gulf. They're going to pull more water out of the ocean. That's what they do.
Yeah.
And they're going to bring it farther inland because they are stronger.
Yes.
And they're going to dump it. And that's exactly what happened here was literally a textbook illustration of something that people have been warning about.
Yeah, you got warmer ocean water. Sucks up more moisture into the atmosphere and gets it stronger and really energizes it. Helene went from being a Category 1 storm to a Category 4 storm in less than 24 hours.
Yeah.
And as you said, there's more water, there's more energy, there's more wind. It goes further inland, and and here it was, and
it also came very close to. Now, had the storm taken a different track, we don't know exactly what it would have done here in East Tennessee, because obviously coming around the mountains the way it did affected, where the water fell, how the water fell. Yeah. But earlier indications had that storm track coming a little bit farther to the west, which would have put us right in the heart of that deluge.
Well, it looked like to me, from looking back, and again, I got my meteorology degree at Vestal, so but the essentially the remnants of the eye of the storm are what came over Knoxville,
right?
And as if you pay attention to a lot of these things, the real powerful part of a hurricane is to the east of the eye, as everything moves in the counterclockwise direction, and that's why Western North Carolina and Upper East Tennessee got the brunt of it. We were relatively calm, and it looked like from of course it's breaking up as it comes inland and everything, but it looks kind of like basically what was left of the eye of the storm is what kind of came over us. So we got some wind, we got some rain, but thankfully we didn't get the brunt of it. And you're right. I think if it came a little bit further to the west, if the remnants of the eye had gone over Chattanooga, say, it would have been a lot worse here.
Absolutely. And, I saw somebody on social media had cobbled together a bunch of headlines, stories that have been written about Asheville in recent years, all talking about how Asheville is attracting people who are looking for a climate haven, all kind of keyed to the idea that because it's in the mountains and it's pretty far inland, that this was going to be a nice, safe place for people who are maybe moving from Florida, more obviously threatened areas, for people to come to. And I've heard people talk about East Tennessee in that same way. Right. I mean, there has been speculation that one of the things that is going to benefit Knoxville in coming years is going to be our relative protection. We're surrounded by mountains. We're in a nice little valley. But I think that this puts the whole idea of climate havens under question. Like, there's probably not really such a thing.
Yeah, because it is global.
Yeah. So I don't know that there's a lot else for us to say about this beyond, of course, we wish all the best for the people and communities that have been affected by this. We are going to have a story actually this coming week from one of our own correspondents who happened to be in Asheville when this hit. And so we're going to have some first-person account of dealing with all of that. We send out our thoughts to the people of all of those affected communities.
And one other thing, a lot of people are giving a lot now, but this is going to be a long-term recovery for some of these communities, and no one's going to be, or not, I shouldn't say no one, but people are not likely to be, sending pallet loads of water up to Greenville or Elizabethton or Unicoi County anytime, a month from now. But you can donate money to reputable organizations. The East Tennessee Foundation, for example, has a fund set up for just this kind of event.
Yeah.
And they can direct those funds, and other organizations do. They're obviously not the only one, but it's going to be an ongoing thing.
Yeah, it definitely will be. And for those of us in East Tennessee who are accustomed to taking those, little weekend jaunts over to Western North Carolina, we're not going to have interstate access there until sometime in 2025.
Yeah.
Who knows when exactly?
Yeah. Both of the interstates that go there from here are out until sometime in 2025. Highway 441 through the Smokies is open. However, it's also the Smokies, and it's also 2-lane.
Yeah,
and
that's a pretty long drive from Knoxville to Cherokee.
And
go that way.
And then it's even further beyond that to go to wherever you're actually going in North Carolina. But there are going to be some of the minor roads that will open, especially I think in down toward the southeast Tennessee area. You'll be able to get over to North Carolina there. But as far as being anything nothing's going to be convenient about getting to North Carolina for the next year.
That's right. All right. Well, let's look a little closer to home, specifically South Knoxville, specifically Sevier Avenue, which of course has seen a lot of commercial and residential development in recent years. City Council this past week approved a long-planned set of infrastructure investments there. What's going on?
Yeah, this is one of those things that with the South Waterfront, you're talking about a long-term thing, from 2005 or what?
It's been almost 20 years.
Yeah,
right?
when they the South Waterfront, vision plan was developed. It always envisioned improvements to Sevier Avenue, the infrastructure there. Of course, for various reasons, things were delayed and all, and they're finally getting to where they're going to make improvements to about a 5-block stretch of Sevier Avenue. And Sevier Avenue, for those of you who haven't been to South Knoxville, don't go to the South Waterfront, it's kind of a revitalized commercial street now. There are a lot of several businesses have opened in recent years. They're thriving. It's kind of a hip, exciting place to go.
A bunch of new apartment complexes.
So there are a lot of new residents, a lot of new businesses. But this stretch of Sevier Avenue has remained unchanged since, other than the businesses, the street itself has not had any real improvements. So that's what this project's going to do, and it's going to be expensive. It's a $17.6 million project, and one of the things it's going to do that's very expensive is putting the utilities all underground. The power lines, cable, all that is going to go underground.
Which has aesthetic benefits, but as we have just seen in this storm, it also has resiliency benefits.
A storm will not knock down these are in basically concrete vaults. These are in conduits, in concrete vaults underneath the ground. They're pretty safe, so they will be. But yeah, they're going to be doing that. They're also going to be doing the road improvements and sidewalk things and all the things that go with that. And this is from Davenport, which is where South Knoxville Elementary is, all the way down to where Island Home Avenue comes in. And down at that end is going to be one of the roundabouts that we've seen pop up in Knoxville and Knox County in the last several years. So they're going to have a roundabout there. There's it's a weird intersection now. Sevier Avenue comes in from the west and curves sharply to the south. You got Island Home Avenue coming in, and you've got Foggy Bottom Street coming in almost like side by side with Island Home, and it's a real tricky and
at different grades too. Foggy Bottom's lower than Island Home, and
so they're going to go in. They're going to raise the ground down there up a little bit to make sure that they can do this, and then put in a roundabout, which is roundabouts are they've taken East Tennessee drivers a while to adjust to, but they are generally safer than a four-way intersection. There are fewer points where cars can run into each other, essentially, and so that will be going in. This is a project that's going to start in the early 2025, right after the first of the year, is the target start. The last 18 months, it's going to take a long time. It takes a while to get those to do the whole utility stuff. There's a lot of coordination. I mean, we've got to coordinate with KUB, Comcast, AT&T, the city, TDOT. Everybody's involved. So, which is one of the things that, in addition to the COVID interruption, kind of slowed down the start of the project. But it's about ready to go. One of the things that people have been very concerned about down there in South Knoxville is the impact on the businesses along Sevier Avenue. As we said, a lot of these businesses are thriving down there now, and then all of a sudden it's a double whammy because the Gate Street Bridge closed.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to need to be repaired. It's not going to reopen anytime soon.
Right. It doesn't even have a timeline right now.
It doesn't even have a timeline. Anyone who thinks that it will open anytime, I guess the over under, if you're betting, would be by the end of 2025. I think that that it's going to be months, if not longer than a year, for that to happen. We don't know yet even what the extent of the damage that needs to be repaired is to it. Anyway, it's closed now, so that cuts off some access from downtown to Sevier Avenue, and they're trying to do some things to mitigate that with traffic signal timing and things like that. But now you're going to come in and close or not close and tear up the main business street in this neighborhood, and the city is going to keep one lane open in either direction as they do this. It's basically a 4-lane street. But they're going to keep one lane open in each direction at all times. They're under the contractors have this in their contract that they have to do that, and there may be some times where there will be something temporary where they'll have the flagman out there with the slow and stop signs to try to keep traffic moving. But for the most part they'll be open, and they're hoping that that people will still go down there. Vice Mayor Tommy Smith, who represents South Knoxville, said, "Yeah, please come on down and help these people out." The one of the things that the city's done, Tom Clabo, the engineering director, told me that one of the things that they're going to be doing is before it even starts, of course, they're going to meet with the business owners and the contractors, get them all together, get them to know each other. The business owners will have direct access to the contractors if they have a problem with some of the work that's going on. They don't have to call the city and hope some bureaucrat turns around and calls the contractor. They'll be able to talk to the contractor directly. But that's going to be, and it's the last kind of big infrastructure project on kind of the east end of the South waterfront. The area from Henley, the Henley Bridge down to Island Home, and so the last big major project. And like I said, it's going to take a while. Going to be 18 months or so, but the city and the people of South Knoxville are kind of hoping that it will be worth the pain.
Yeah, well, and as Vice Mayor Smith said, if you are a fan of any of the businesses down there, this will be a good time to keep coming down, deal with whatever hassle you need to deal with to be there, and continue to support them so that they are still there when the whole project is done.
Right.
We've seen the city go through a whole series of these kinds of corridor improvement projects. Of course, we saw Cumberland Avenue some years ago. Magnolia, one section of Magnolia has been done. There's further plans for Magnolia, North Central up through North Knoxville, and this in South Knoxville. So it's kind of been in all the different quadrants of the city. They've been focusing on these major corridors and doing infrastructure upgrades, hoping that will help. And in all of these cases, it has gone hand in hand with increased private investment as well.
Right. Yeah, that's the one of the things that people in city administration kind of fond of saying is, well, we can't put a business in, but we can make it an attractive place to do business.
Right.
And hopefully that will attract investment, and that's precisely what this is about.
Okay, let's talk about elections a little bit. Scott, are you aware that we have an election coming up?
I've heard that.
Yeah. Early voting in the November 5th election starts in under 2 weeks now. October 16th is the first day of early voting, and that will run through Halloween, October 31st. So all of us who are eager to for whatever reason and whatever side we're coming from, get this thing over and done with. We will get to do that soon. But we, of course, as usual, are focusing on some of our local competitive races. So we had a story this past week looking at the two candidates for State House District 18. This is an interesting district. It was heavily redrawn in our last redistricting. This used to be a mostly kind of West Knoxville district, and it was basically redrawn, I don't think this is a controversial statement, to try to make it more safely Republican. It has been a Republican district, but before the redistricting, there had been a couple of elections that were maybe closer than the Republican candidates would have liked. And so they took out some sections that had been drifting a little bit more Democratic, like West Hills, for example. And so it still includes a chunk of West Knoxville, but then it kind of curls around and jumps the river and goes down Alcoa Highway and takes in a lot of much more Republican South Knoxville. And it's currently represented by State Rep Elaine Davis, a Republican who won 2 years ago. So she's just finishing her first term. She's seeking re-election. The Democratic candidate is Bryan Goldberg, who is he first came to Knoxville to attend the University of Tennessee on a swimming scholarship. He was a co-captain of the swim team while he was at UT. He also swam for the U.S. national team, and he has since leaving school, he decided to stay in Knoxville and has worked in the restoration insurance industry, an industry that's getting a lot of work right now in East Tennessee, because what they do is they're all about disaster recovery, working with insurance companies. And Scott, this is a race that, on the one hand, if you look at the results of the 2022 election, where Davis ran against Democrat Gregory Kaplan, it wasn't that close. She won about 54% of the vote. She won by nearly 1,800 votes across the district. So, it's not one that you obviously look at and say, oh, yeah, that one could go either way. On the other hand, it is by far, it was the closest of the seats that are currently held. There are 7 state house districts in Knox County. 5 of them are currently held by Republicans. This was the one of those that had the closest election. It was the only one that was under a 10-point margin. And so it's one that Democrats have really invested a lot in. I think part of that has to do with the makeup of the district. Part of it has to do with they feel like they've got a pretty good candidate in Bryan Goldberg. He presents well. What can, he's a dynamic, successful guy. He has, his background as a swimmer. He's been very involved in the community. He was the president of the Knoxville Jewish Alliance for several years, which of course operates the Jewish Community Center here. He has, he was 40 under 40. He's been in Leadership Knoxville. He has a long record of various kinds of community engagement. So the kind of candidate, and he describes himself as a moderate, pragmatic Democrat, that he's about solving problems. Davis has sometimes, let's say she's been portrayed by some of her critics as not being so moderate, as being among the more far right of our local Republicans. She also made a lot of people, at least on city council, Knoxville City Council, mad because she was the one who proposed the bill that is forcing the change in how city council elections are conducted, which we're going to talk about that in a minute as well. But she's the reason that bill got passed. And she's voted lockstep essentially with the Republican supermajority on abortion laws, on gun laws, and all of the things that Democrats are running on, trying to say that the supermajority is out of touch with the people of Tennessee. Davis, I thought it was interesting in talking to her about what she is most proud of in her 2 years of service so far. Did not mention those issues. She's not out now. If you ask her about those issues, she says, yes, I support our positions on those. On abortion, she, made the point that she did vote with the Republican majority to add some more specific language around the exemptions for protecting the life of a pregnant woman. Of course, there are a lot of people who still say that those exemptions are not sufficient and that doctors are still operating under sort of threat of criminal prosecution. But she is, the issues that she wants to highlight are more pragmatic things that she's been involved in. Like, for example, she's put a lot of emphasis on making sure that every public school has a school nurse assigned to it. Things like that I think she thinks are maybe a little more palatable to just kind of your average moderate voter. People who might be winnable by an argument from Democrats saying, no, we're the moderate ones. I think she wants to present herself that way.
Well, people who are less partisan.
Right, exactly.
People who are interested and engaged, but, they're not, they're not the ones who are going to be, out knocking on doors for a candidate or anything like that. They're just regular folks who might lean one way or another, but they're open-minded about who they're going to vote for. That's who that kind of message appeals to. And Goldberg is very similar in that he's going after those same voters,
right? Because both of them know they're going to get the hardcore partisans are going to vote the way
they got them.
Yeah. Well, and Seth Barber, our producer, is over here holding up because Seth happens to live in this district, and he's holding up some of the mailers that have been making the rounds in this race.
I'm actually a little disappointed. I usually get a lot more when it gets contested like this, but going back to the Kaplan race, I don't think I got but maybe like one.
Yeah.
In the Kaplan race, I I don't think the Democrats had as strong a feeling that they had a real shot at 18 last time around, where I think they do this. And I, like, personally, as a voter in the district, I think it seems like all the different metrics are in place that it looks like this is an upsettable district for the Democrats. But yeah, it's just like, I remember talking to Elaine back in the last cycle, and especially in the primary of that cycle, like, she was leaning a lot harder right against Testerman.
Right, because she was running she had a Republican challenger in 2022 in Janet Testerman, and so Davis very much painted herself as, I'm the real, conservative. I'm the one that's more to the right. That definitely was her presentation. She didn't have a primary challenger this year, so she didn't have to go through that.
Right, so I'm looking at the flyers I get, and, it's like the 3 or 4 points I like to put on each flyers. Elaine's got reduce state franchise tax, authorize harsher punishment for illegal immigrants, voted to allow teachers to carry, where Goldberg's got restore reproductive rights, cut costs for Tennesseans on the grocery tax, invest in public education, and make communities safer. They both seem to be really pushing a little bit. Like, I was actually, while I was listening, I was reading the Elaine Davis one. I in hindsight, like, I'm a little surprised that she's leaning into the teacher carry one.
Right.
That one didn't seem to be a popular one if you're trying to get the middle ground voters.
Yeah, definitely. In Knox County, there was a lot of public reaction against the idea of teachers carrying. But, of course, you do have your Second Amendment voters who want to hear that. And so, obviously, she wants to make sure she's still checking that box for them. But, Scott, this has also been a race where we have seen a little bit of mudslinging coming from the Republican side.
I got that flyer, too.
Yeah, and it didn't come directly from the Davis campaign. It came from the state Republican caucus.
Yeah, the House Republican caucus. Essentially, Davis's colleagues in the House.
Yeah.
But she herself has repeatedly said she doesn't condone it. She doesn't think that these are the right tactics to use. And all of this revolves around, essentially, Bryan Goldberg and his wife were 3 months late in paying. They moved into the house that they own now in 2018. They have paid their property taxes on time every one of the years since, except for 1 year, 2 years ago, or maybe it was last year, 2023. They were 3 months late on it. Goldberg has come out and said that there was a reason for this. They had a check fraud incident, an identity theft incident that they did report to the authorities, and that because of that, their whole bank account got, messed up for a few months, and that because of that explanation that they gave to the trustee's office in paying their taxes late, they were not even assessed a late penalty. They're all paid up, Goldberg has been very incensed about this attack, particularly as he has said his wife is the one who manages the household finances, so he's taking it as an attack on his wife. He has actually filed a legal challenge. He's sought an injunction because there's a website out there with this information on it, and they've also been sending out flyers, as Seth just handed one here, as calling Goldberg a tax cheat, essentially.
Yeah, I was going to say the allegation is that he's a tax cheat,
right?
He was. Yeah, for some.
Which I'm just going to go ahead and say, that's blatantly false. Cheating on your taxes is when you report something that's false, or you don't report something. Basically, you try consciously to avoid paying your taxes. That is just so clearly not what happened here. Yeah. Leaving aside the explanation of the check fraud, the most you could say is that
he was late.
He was late. Lots of people, in fact, are late on paying their property taxes. That is not that unusual a thing to happen. It can happen for any number of reasons. And so to call somebody a tax cheat because they were a couple months late on paying their property taxes that's just false. That is not what that phrase tax cheat means. So that is a false allegation that they're making. The thing that I thought, honestly, and you and I have both seen a lot of smear campaigns or attempted smear campaigns in different races, was, man, if 3 months late on property taxes one time is the most that they dug up on this guy, there must not be very much there.
He's pretty squeaky clean, I guess.
Yeah, but Goldberg did not take it that way, and he has challenged it. Now he was not granted an injunction against it because courts are very deferential to political speech.
Yes.
And they do not want to get involved in litigating the ins and outs of everything that every candidate says about another candidate. Goldberg this is the first time he's run for public office. And so I think sometimes it can be a bit of a shock for people to run for office, and suddenly there's somebody out there saying mean and or false things about you on the internet or other places. I mean, that is
especially about something that you don't think, it's between me and the trustee, that's
right. Exactly. And if the trustee's office doesn't have any problem with this, why should anybody else? Yeah. But I'm not saying that it's good that this is part of the process, but this is part of the process.
Yeah. There's a lot of, there's a lot of this exaggeration to lying or willful mischaracterization of people. That happens. It's happened for a long time, and it is one of those things that unfortunately keeps some people who would be good public servants from running, because they be, now someone's going to sit there and go, well, I was late on paying my property taxes 4 years ago, and so maybe I shouldn't.
Yeah,
I don't want to go through this.
Yeah, no, I mean, definitely. I mean, I know people who have thought about running and have decided not to, partly because they thought it was going to be too unpleasant. And I think that's a very rational decision for people to make, regardless of what party they're in. You got to, on the one hand, you need to, I respect the people who do put themselves forward. On the other hand, if you do put yourself forward, yes, people, there's a good chance people are going to say things about you that you think are unfair, and that is something that happens. And
especially if you have a chance, like if you have a real chance, you're going to take it.
The stronger a candidate you are, the more likely it is that somebody's going to look for some way to go after you. The one other thing I wanted to mention while we're talking about the state house races is there was a forum for candidates in all of the competitive state house races this past week that I served as the moderator as for the League of Women Voters. And just noting for the record, and this is something we've talked about before, it's part of a long-standing pattern. So there are 5 competitive races that have a Democrat and a Republican running. One of those races also has an independent candidate. All of them were invited, except I think maybe the independent candidate was left off the invitation, I heard. So that's too bad. But all of the Democrats and Republicans were invited, and 4 candidates showed up out of those 10, and they were all Democrats. There was one District 16, where neither the Republican incumbent, Michelle Carringer, nor the Democratic challenger, Lauren Carver, were there. But in the other 4 races, the Democrats were there and the Republicans were not. And what that meant, the questions came from the audience, and the questions were about the exact normal range of things you would expect. They were about abortion, they were about guns, they were about safety, the kind of major issues that the legislature grapples with, funding of public schools, school vouchers, all of those kinds of things. And basically the answers in each round were all 4 of the Democrats agreeing with each other on, yes, we should do this, no, we shouldn't do that. There was not much of a diversity of opinion, as you might expect. And Scott, we've talked about this before, but this has just become, there are exceptions. There are Republican candidates and Republican incumbents who are good about coming to public forums. But it has increasingly become the case that Republicans, especially Republican incumbents, especially those who have districts that, that would be hard for a Republican to lose, they just don't like showing up with their opponents at public events. They've just kind of stopped doing it.
Yeah, it's kind of a troubling development over time. Because especially, locally, these forums, I mean, these local forums are not the same as presidential debates where you've got. I mean, these are your neighbors. These are people you know, and
people who you are seeking to represent.
You are seeking to represent them, yes, and I get it in a way. I mean, the Republicans tend to think, especially with the League of Women Voters, they believe the League of Women Voters is a liberal organization that's out to get them.
And the League of Women Voters has a separate arm that does take policy positions. It is more or less a liberal organization within the realm of, I mean, they're mostly about civic engagement.
Yeah.
And most of the things that they support are around civic engagement, voting access. Some of those are issues that have come to be defined as more liberal or democratic issues, but that has a lot to do with where the Republican Party has gone on those issues too. I mean, the League of Women Voters is kind of standing for the values they always have. But, I've been the moderator at a lot of League of Women Voters events, and I think you would be hard pressed to say that the events maybe you don't like, and it's not just the League, there's a whole range of sponsoring organizations, the Knoxville branch of the NAACP, organizations representing especially various marginalized groups, Muslims and Latino voters and so forth, all of which are maybe groups that tend to vote more Democratic. That is true. But the League has said, they're willing to co-sponsor with any organization that wants to co-sponsor with them, as long as they're okay with sort of the rules of the forum. But B, the questions at these events are generated by people in the audience. So, if you want to go there and you want there to be questions that you think are going to be more favorable to you, you can come there with your own supporters and they can write the questions. And they, when I'm up there moderating, I just get handed note cards with questions on them and I just read the questions. I don't even do fact checking. People who are afraid, maybe that's something that could happen or should happen in some scenario, but that's not even what these are. And so for anybody to say that the events themselves or the discussion at them is in any way biased, that some candidate is going to be disadvantaged somehow because of their party or their political views. That's just absolutely not the case. And there are Republicans who come to these. I mean, I am moderating another one, also sponsored by the League, in 2 weeks, for the 6th state Senate district. And the Republican incumbent, Becky Duncan Massey, is going to be there. She's committed to be there along with the Democratic challenger, DeMonica Bryan. And so it's not that no Republicans ever come. And when Republicans do come to them, they do not ever afterward complain and say that was unfair. I think a lot of it is just political calculation. If you are in what has been drawn by the legislature to be a safe seat, you're pretty much confident that you're going to win. You don't see any advantage to going out there and being seen in public side by side with your opponent. That gives your opponent a certain degree of visibility and legitimacy because you're kind of standing side by side with them. And there's also always in the modern era, the perennial danger of the viral moment where maybe you just say something really stupid. We do have some state legislators who have said some things that have, who have said things on the floor of the legislature that have gone viral at the national level. So that is a danger. And so I think I understand the political calculation of it. It's like, why bother if you don't have to? I think the answer from a civic engagement standpoint would be, well, that's part of the just like Bryan Goldberg has discovered the unpleasant part of the process of running for office. People can say mean things about you. Well, part of the process ought to be, if you're making the case, you should be willing to go out and make the case.
Yeah.
I have a question on curiosity. Does the League or any of the other sponsor groups ever do like a pre and post survey on people that come?
They do gather some information afterward, but I can't speak to exactly what that information is. Yes, there are ways for them to gather feedback, yeah.
Because I'd be curious if there's any sort of rough data on, does anybody go and spectate one of these forums and then change their mind? Or make up their mind that they haven't made up otherwise? Because at least a couple that I've been to, just like everything else election in Knoxville, Knox County, turnout's pretty abysmal.
Yeah.
And so, again, just going into that political calculation point you were making. It's like, well, I go to this forum. There's 15 people in the audience.
Well, I'm going to push back on that a little
Okay.
bit because, I mean, it depends on what you mean by turnout being abysmal. I would say the turnout at the events is not as abysmal as the turnout at the voting booth because, so there were 60 people at this event on this past Monday. And, 60 people coming out to anything on a Monday night is not insignificant. Some of the forums earlier in the year attracted 100 people or more. So, people do come out to these things. And of course, part of that is the candidates who come encourage their supporters to come. If more Republicans came to these events, more Republicans would come. I mean, if more Republican candidates came, more Republicans, they would bring more of their supporters with them.
Right. And you would get more media engagement with more people there too, I would think.
Yeah, and you'd probably get a broader range of
Sure.
questions.
And precisely as I was going to say that, and if you subscribe to the idea that you go to a League of Women Voters event and the crowd is going to be mostly liberal, so you're going to get these questions that are designed to make you look bad. Well, if you bring your people, the chances are of getting questions that would be, if you subscribe to this theory that you're going to get friendlier questions, that's the way to get friendlier questions.
Yeah, bring your own people.
Bring your own people. Ask the questions.
And I do just want to note that there really isn't like a both sides issue here because I'm not aware of any instances of a forum being organized by a conservative group that Democratic candidates have refused to go to. Instead, what tends to happen, the conservative groups organize forums for Republican candidates when there are like Republican primaries.
Right.
And they will invite, a local Republican club will invite the Republican candidates running in the primary to come there. They don't invite the Democrats. So it's not like, we have both, the more or less liberal League of Women Voters inviting everybody and the Republicans don't go, but then, there's a conservative group that invites. Now, maybe that would happen. Maybe Democratic candidates would decline an invitation, if Tennessee Right to Life, let's say, wanted to have a forum. I don't know. But that doesn't happen. Like the conservative groups that have forums just don't invite. There's just this disinclination. And it really is, at least here in this part of the country, it really is on the majority party side, a disinclination to engage publicly with their political opposition.
Yep.
They just don't like to do it. And so they will probably continue to not like to do it, and we will continue to note that they are not doing it.
Or at least until the calculation changes and they feel like they need to do it.
Right.
But that doesn't seem like a future that's near, at least.
Not in the short term, especially not at these legislative races. It's a little bit different in some of the local races. Okay, Scott, you also wrote this week about the Knoxville city referendum. We have talked about this, but the proposal on the ballot that all city voters are going to have an opportunity to weigh in on is whether to change our city council seats from their current makeup to being all at-large positions.
Yeah, and this was decided to do this as more of an explainer than anything else, because it is a little. The question itself is pretty straightforward, but there's a lot. It's kind of complex. There's a lot of complexity surrounding this. One thing is you mentioned Representative Davis bringing forth this legislation. What that legislation did was it closed a loophole that allowed the system that the city of Knoxville has been using for the past 55 years of how they elect district representatives. That at-large representatives, obviously, they get voted on by all citizens all across the city. The city process has been that district voters select, in the primary, select the two top finishers. Those two top finishers go to the general election, and everybody citywide votes for the winner. So the loophole disallows that. If you have districts, you've got to have district voting in the general election as well.
Which, to be clear, is how we elect pretty much everything else.
Almost everything else, yeah. We do that.
Commission, school board, state legislative seats. The voting is by district.
That's right. We talked about the 18th district. Well, if you live in the 15th district, you don't get to vote in the 18th district. And it's that way. The county commission, you said, it's that way with virtually every city in Tennessee,
right?
Nashville, large cities in Tennessee.
Nashville only votes within the district.
There are only 16 cities that do an all at large, have an all at large system that they are contemplating here. The largest of those is Morristown. So what happened was. The city, because this loophole closed, the old system's gone. It can't be resurrected. It's gone, done, buried, mourned, or not, but it's gone. So let's not even think about that anymore. But now you've got what you had to have happen is you have to have something to replace it, obviously. And so the city council has put on the ballot a question is basically calls for all seats to be at large, but there would be 6 instead of 6 district seats. There would be 6 regional seats, and those would still be at large, but they would have residency requirements. They would correspond to the current districts as well. You're basically just changing the name. But for instance, the 1st district, which is South Knoxville in the UT area, would be called the South Region. The 2nd district, which is mostly West Knoxville, would be called the West Region, and so on and so forth around the compass. But the ballot question kind of just says that you would have these regional representatives, and everybody will be at large. And that's all it says.
Mm-hmm.
You have if you're a voter and you go in and you haven't done your homework.
If you're a voter and you're not a Compass subscriber,
you definitely. But you just don't know what the heck that means.
Mm-hmm.
And what would happen? And so this story that we did kind of explain, okay, this is what happens if you vote yes, this is what happens if you vote no. And it was
and if you vote no, the default then would be we would maintain the current 6 districts that we have, but those elections would take place only within the district. Both the primary and the general would only be district voters for the district representatives.
Right.
I have 2 technical questions here. This is real in the weeds, and I apologize if this is too much for the listeners. But one is, will this be a significant enough change to erase incumbency requirements? Not incumbency requirements, but term limits?
Nope.
No.
Term limits will still apply.
At large, I mean, there's already at-large members of council, and they're term limited too. All council members are term limited.
And it doesn't, and also none of the current district representatives would benefit in any way because they are all term limited.
Okay, so like Roberto, which is District 2, the West District,
right?
He's term limited right now. The next
he will
election,
not be able to serve again.
Even under the new at-large format, he couldn't serve again.
That is correct.
Okay, then I forgot my second question. I apologize. Because it's confusing. Like it's super confusing.
It can be confusing.
Because I think like a lot of people, like again, it's one of those like there's the lack of engagement runs into I don't know what I'm doing here, and so yeah, I still want to vote, so I'm going to vote yes for this thing, and then you don't realize what that's functionally doing. Oh, that was my second question. I'm sorry. So if no wins and we default, we'll still have to have a future election on this to get the charter corrected.
Well, no. Ideally you'd want to do that, but they have to follow state law, which is if you have districts, only district voters can vote. So they'd still have to follow the state law.
Right.
And eventually you'd want to change the charter to to
which
align
can
with
only
state
be done
law.
by referendum. City council can't just rewrite the charter.
And they're only in every, they can only be done in even numbered years in the city. So, for instance, if no prevails, the 2025 election, regardless of what the charter says, because the charter says the old system, then it's going to be the default version, which is.
But in the 26th election.
But then in 26, you'd have a referendum to formally adopt that.
So the charter matches the state law requirement. Right. Okay.
Yeah. But in places where the charter, and this is true wherever you are, whatever the area you're talking is, whatever the charter conflicts with state law wins. So.
So let's talk just a little bit about the pros and cons that the people. Yeah. So people who are including Councilman Roberto and really the majority, 8 out of the 9 city council members voted to put this on the ballot. What do they see as the benefits of it?
Well, the benefit they see is the benefit that they see or that they saw in the old system, in that when you have every council member running citywide, at least in the general election, you have every citizen in every part of the city votes for them or against them, and so they represent everybody. They're accountable to everybody. Is the one thing, and that's been the big selling. That was the big selling point of the previous.
And by having to run citywide, they get more knowledge of the whole.
City. Yeah, they do. And because if you live in South Knoxville, you might not be quite as familiar with Northwest Knoxville, for instance. You might not be able to. You might never have even been to Norwood. So yeah, you get to know the city better. You get to understand the issues facing other parts of the city, not just yours, and so that's kind of the big benefit for the elected officials, and then they also say, well, for voters, you get to vote for all 9 city council members, so you have a say in every single person who's there. What it loses is the direct district ownership of the candidates. Mm-hmm. Yes, there would be a regional residency requirement. If you wanted to run for the South region seat, you do have to live in South Knoxville or around UT, but you would have to live there, so that's fine. But the voters of that particular region or district, they wouldn't be the ones selecting the candidates to go to the general election, and so that's kind of the big drawback. There is you have the opponents, kind of one of their nightmare scenarios is, okay, you've got candidates running in your South region, say, but they're running citywide. Remember, the primary is still under this system would be citywide. So the person who is or the 2 people who are the favorites of the district itself, of South Knoxville, and they may be, they may not have as much money as other candidates. They may not be as well known in other areas. They could lose in the primary to somebody that the citywide does better. So the district won't be selecting their own candidates for the general election. And that has happened in the general election in the past, where that goes citywide. You have the top finisher in the district only primary loses in the general election because they're not as well known throughout the city as as their opponent. The first one that I covered that was like that was a 3rd district race where Steve Hall finished second in primary, but he was much better known outside the district than he was inside the district. He lost to a guy who was very well-known neighborhood activist and everything else in the district-only primary. Got citywide. Steve Hall cleaned up.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Well, and there's also the concern, isn't there, that running citywide is just harder than running within a district. And so for anybody to consider running for, if the seats are all at large, they're going to need to raise more money. And it is going to favor people who are either better known citywide or have broader networks, maybe somebody who's like a lawyer who's really well known within the legal community and has this whole network of people across the city or the state that they can draw on, and that they will be in a better position than maybe somebody who is very well known within the community, but only within the community because they're, the head of a local neighborhood organization or something like that. And that you're going to some degree, discourage people who come up through the more grassroots avenues that a lot of our local representatives do come through, because it's going to be too much of a hurdle to think, I can't just run in North Knoxville. I also have to run in, Holston Hills and Dean Hill and all these different places.
Yeah. And so that's another another thing there. And there are a couple other things. The similar to that is that there's concerns of the that it could possibly either dilute the black vote or cut back on black representation, especially in the sixth district seat, which would violate the Voting Rights Act. Those are legitimate concerns because that has happened in other cities. It hasn't happened in Knoxville, and we've had at-large voting in the general election, since 1969. We've had a black representative from the 6th district every election since then, and even the last 2 races, I had Gwen McKenzie, who's an African American, who has defeated well-funded, well-known white candidates both times.
Right.
So it's not really. It's one of those things. It's a possibility. Recent history indicates that it's really not that big of a problem, but it could be because, again, the district's favorites might not win citywide in the primary.
Well, and another issue that has been raised, and this is true under the system that we have had, is that some districts have much higher voter turnout than other districts do. And so when you have citywide voting, functionally, for example, the 2nd district, which is West Knoxville, that has very high voter turnout. The 6th district, which is East Knoxville, tends to have very low voter turnout. And so you get essentially an overrepresentation geographically just by virtue of where people vote more. Right. And what that ends up meaning is if everything is citywide, and again, this is more or less the way things have already been because we've had citywide voting for all the council seats. But it is true that West Knoxville has been more represented at the ballot box in city council voting than other parts of the city because West Knoxville votes more, and that you kind of end up with various, as you say, that hasn't yet produced the kinds of racial discrepancies that might, say, attract the attention of the Justice Department. But it definitely means that some parts of the city are more represented than other parts. Yeah,
it hasn't. And in fact, proponents of the at-large thing point to the system, the former system where we still did have at-large voting city in the general election. They point to the fact that system has produced the most diverse city council there is. Majority women, There are 3 women of color on the panel. And that's 1/3. 1/3 of the city council is made up of women of color. So, and they say, well, and that's, and they're absolutely right. I mean, that system did produce that.
Now you could argue that it hasn't given us ideological diversity, because
that's where I was going next. And that's why Elaine Davis put this out there. She's a Republican, as we talked about, a conservative Republican. She doesn't live in the city, although some of her constituents do, and that's how it got sold in the legislature. They got Democratic support in the legislature by talking about the Voting Rights Act. They got the Republican support by talking about the fact that this could increase conservative representation in the city of Knoxville, and it very well could. Right now, the every single city council person is elected by the very exact same pool of voters. So it stands to reason, and it has been shown in history that city council is pretty is not very diverse is when it comes to ideology. In the 1990s, the city was more Republican. Victor Ashe was the mayor. Basically, 7 of the 9 members were also right of center Republican leaning people. And then as the city has changed and become more progressive, now you have this council. The most conservative member is if you want to call her the most conservative member, would be Lynn Fugit, who is responsible for the most progressive piece of legislation that's been passed in the last 8 years, and so it's kind of
her support of the affordable housing.
The affordable housing fund, and she is essentially a centrist, very pragmatic. She's not very ideological at all. Resents it when you accuse her of being ideological. So but right. There are
the current range on council is basically from center to left.
Yeah, right. And so one of the things is we talk about the 3rd district a lot. The 3rd district is the district in the city that is most likely to vote red. Mm-hmm. The current representative there, Seema Singh, when she first ran for office, lost in the primary, which was district only, but won citywide. And it's a more conservative district than most others. It is more likely Republicans do better there than they do anywhere else in the city.
Yep.
And so the changing to the district only system would theoretically make that put that in play for someone who has more conservative leanings, and they would have a voice on council that they don't have now.
Yeah. And
but and here's the thing though, when voters go into the ballot box, they won't know what the alternative is.
Right.
That's the thing about this, because referendum questions have to be framed yes or no. They can't be pick one.
And they're not required to say, if you vote for this, here's what happens, and if you vote against it, here's what happens. Like they could spell all that out if they wanted to. If
you can do it in a few enough words, because there's a word limit.
But and
another thing too, and this is one of those things, the people who vote in the city elections in the odd numbered years are generally fairly engaged. This is a presidential election year. It brings out people who don't vote any other time other than for president or whatever. People live in the city who aren't engaged, who don't even know how the city has been electing people. And then they get to this question on the ballot, and a lot of times it'd be interesting. I need to look this up at some point, see what the research says. It's easy to say yes. And
there is a tendency for referendums to be approved.
Yeah.
And partly because they're usually written by people who want them to be passed.
Yes.
And so they're usually written in a way that makes it sound as sort of user-friendly or like a positive thing.
Yeah. Yeah. This one's I will say this is fairly neutrally written. And you will have a lot of less informed voters. That's one of the reasons I wanted to do this explainer, because having it spelled out. Okay, this is what happens if you vote yes. This is what happens if you vote no. That will help, and it's going to be an interesting thing. I mean, this is the last question. This is the last item on the ballot.
Yeah.
If you live in the city, and the ballot you get to vote on, this will be the very last item. And there's another amendment too. This is question number 2. There is a question number 1,
which has to do with realigning the 5th district election cycle, which maybe we'll talk about that one a little bit.
Yeah, let's talk about it by itself,
point.
Because it really has nothing to do with this one.
Yeah, and it's less of a significant change.
Right. Oh yeah. This is a fundamental change.
Right.
So I think it like I said, I mean, you basically get down to this is one of the things that like I said, the proponents of the change will say is having them all at large will keep them accountable to all voters, and keep every council member accountable to all voters, and it allows all voters to have a say in who is in every seat. You get one of the big things is you get to vote for 9 people, not just 4.
Right.
So,
but depending on where you are on the political spectrum, it's possible you get to vote for 9 people, and none of the people you vote for will get elected. So
that's true.
And just one more point, because I thought this was an interesting point that was made in an op-ed against this proposal that ran in the News Sentinel by our friend Hanson Sale, who we've had on the podcast before. He's the former legislative affairs director for East Tennessee Realtors, and he's kind of a public policy wonk. And he wrote an op-ed opposing this. One point that he made is that, and I think he's correct about this, a lot of the people who are supporting this for city council would not want the same system to be put in place for county commission or the school board. If there was a proposal to say we're going to make all 11 county commission seats at large, meaning they would all be elected across the whole county. And as we know, the voting makeup of Knox County is still more Republican than Democratic. Right now, Democrats are outnumbered on county commission, but they just won another seat. So there's 3 Democrats on county commission out of 11. There are 2 at-large seats on commission right now, both held by Republicans. If county commission made the exact same change that city council is talking about making here, there would almost certainly be 0 Democrats on county commission. And so Hanson's point was kind of like, you can't really say that this is a philosophical position you're taking if you wouldn't support it for county commission, but you do support it for city council. And I thought that was a point worth making, because I think he is right that if that proposal came forth from the Republican Party to change all county commission seats to at large, you would hear an awful lot of opposition from the local Democratic Party.
Yeah. And there are groups out there who are trying to educate the public, persuade the public, because they're not coming from a neutral standpoint. One is the city council movement, and Councilwoman Amelia Parker. They are of the vote no crowd. They do they are concerned about the Voting Rights Act aspect of it, the loss of district voice per se. So they're the ones urging people to vote no. Councilman Andrew Roberto and Reverend Harold Middlebrook just recently formed the Knox Voters Alliance to do the same, to get the word out, and to get the to advocate for voting yes. So those two groups are out there. They're out trying to get engaged with people.
I understand why, but my favorite thing I've seen driving around town now that everybody's political signs are coming out is you have Elaine Davis and the city council movement vote no political signs in the same front yard. Like, I know 100% why it happened, but it's just it's this particular issue made very strange bedfellows, and it's
because there are concerns about it coming from both the left and right sides of the spectrum, for sure. Okay, well, that was a long discussion of that, but it is a complicated issue, and it deserves attention, because one way or another, we're going to have a different voting system for city council next year.
Absolutely.
And you can find Scott's very good deep dive on that on our website at compassknox.com. All right. The one other thing I just kind of wanted to mention here, because I think it got a little bit lost in all of the bad news and all of the effort this week around the flooding. But this past week was Innovate 6.5 week in Knoxville, and this is an annual week of events put on by the Innovate 6.5 Alliance, which includes a whole range of people from the University of Tennessee to Oak Ridge National Labs, the Knoxville Entrepreneur Center, just kind of all sorts of economic development, innovation development folks in the area, that is basically put on to celebrate and encourage entrepreneurship in general in Knoxville and East Tennessee, and especially technology-focused entrepreneurship and innovation. It started with the annual Maker City Summit, which is kind of a big celebration for especially kind of small scale. It can be anybody from, artisans and craftspeople to bakers, people who run restaurants, people who do sort of small scale manufacturing, people who make stuff, essentially, as the name implies. It also included the annual Startup Day, which is a pitch competition, where I think it was 6 different startup companies they're basically seeking funding and trying to get their name out there. They all kind of come and give a pitch. This year they also had the Emerging Entrepreneurs competition, where 3 they're all startups, so I guess these are even more smaller scale startups, companies that and usually run by quite young people, that are in the earliest stages of putting their business plans together, where they all competed. And we had a story talking about one of the things that got announced this week was the launching of a new technology hub in the old city called the 121 Tech Hub, because it's at 121 East Jackson Ave. And this is essentially it's a co-working space like some other co-working spaces we have around town, but it's one specifically focused on technology startups, with the idea being that, maybe these are companies that have a workshop somewhere, or mostly run out of somebody's basement or garage, but have need of an office space, and so they can come in here and use the space and also be around other kind of benefit from the synergy, as they like to say, of being around other people who are also kind of trying to put their own things together and make connections. And Scott, I don't know that there's a whole lot to say about it, except that it's been interesting to see the growth. I think the Knoxville Entrepreneur Center opened in 2013-ish, around there. So really over the last decade, the Maker City Summit started, somewhere a few years after that. Over the last decade, we really have seen this push come together, and there are a lot of resources out there now. I mean, this tech hub is a relatively small thing, but we've got the Clean Tech Spark Accelerator at UT Research Park. ORNL has the Oak Ridge Innovations program for businesses specifically looking to use technology coming out of the lab. And I think that on the one hand, you could say, well, it's like a lot of happy talk. Of course, everybody likes to say that we're a center of innovation and we're friendly to founders and startups and so forth. But I think we've started to see just real, actual pieces of that coming together, these physical spaces that are being occupied by companies. And now there's spaces available at sort of different scales, from sort of the very smallest startups to something like the Clean Tech Accelerator, which is really for people who are ready to, do some significant levels of work. And, I think we're an East Tennessee small business ourselves, and so it's kind of nice to see just that level of energy out there.
Yeah, well, it is kind of fun to see, because the breadth of areas that these startups are trying, and so many of them are out there. People are trying. Some of them will fail. Some of them might succeed, and it's fun to watch people do that. I mean, one of the things that everybody in the United States talks about is the American dream, and these are people who have an idea. They think that they can either make the world a better place, themselves richer, or both, and they're going out there and trying innovative things, or trying new things, and it's kind of interesting to watch, and especially when you don't have any of your own money in.
Yeah, well, just to give one example of one of these companies, there's a company called Knoxbots, which is spelled just like it sounds. You can find it online, and they are one of the members at this 121 Tech Hub space. They use that for their office, but they also won the Emerging Entrepreneur Award, and what they are is essentially a robot lawn service. So, some of us have gotten used to having robot vacuum cleaners in our house. We've got a little Robotech that does a pretty good job. And of course, at the University of Tennessee, they're using the little robot couriers to do meal delivery. This is applying that technology to lawn mowing and grounds maintenance, with the idea that, if they deal with school systems, for example, that, and because a lot of school systems, they contract out their mowing, but instead of just contracting it out to somebody who's going to show up with a crew of guys and mowers, you can contract it out to some little robots that you program them to adjust to the specific terrain and the bounds of the property, and just let them go.
If they need a test yard,
you're volunteering.
I'll volunteer. Yes, they can.
You can go onto their website and see if they're advertising for that. Okay, I think that's everything we had to talk about this week. Bit of a long one, but again, that city referendum, I think especially, is one that deserves conversation. We will probably talk about it again sometime before the election.
I'm sure we will.
To make sure that people understand what they are voting on. Now is the part of the show where we typically look ahead to what is happening in the next week as far as civic affairs and events go. And the answer to that is not much, because this next week is fall break for both Knox County Schools and the University of Tennessee. It is one of those weeks when a lot of our local governments do not schedule meetings or events, because a lot of people plan to be out of town. So we will have coverage of all sorts of things in Compass next week, but there is a deficit of public meetings.
Yeah, be a real it's a real shame to go a whole week where we don't have meetings that last into the night, and we stay up really late writing about them.
I know, we go through withdrawal. Maybe you and I can just choose some night of the week next week to go to the main assembly room of the city county building and just kind of sit there till 9:00 or so.
I'll come with you guys if you want.
Sure.
I'll go stand up there at the lectern and pretend like I'm talking about something important.
I'll meet you down there.
I bet you will. All right. Well, whatever does happen next week, we will be back to talk about it. Thanks, as always, to Lord Seth Barber for his production work here at Barbarian Productions. Our theme music is by Will Wright, and we will talk to you later.
Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily, in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And many thanks to William Wright for composing our theme song. Compass Points is a partnership of Barking Shark Media and Barbarian Productions, and recorded by Lord Seth A. Barber at Barbarian Studios, Knoxville, Tennessee.